Hi internets, I'm Ross. You know how every year you look forward to paying the government a percentage of your income? Well, there's a change that might be happening to that, and I want to tell you about it. This is part 2.5 of our series on the Republican tax reform bill. In part 1, we talked about what people mean when they talk about the left versus right divide. We also had a special episode about how income taxes work. I could not believe how difficult it is to explain this tax bill, so please bear with me. Today's date is Thursday, December 7th, 2017, and there's a problem talking about this tax reform right now. We are right in the middle of it. By the time you see this, they will already have changed. So what I'm going to do is talk about the facts around the bill and the discussion itself, and I've left a lot of links in the description below the video that can help you find out a lot of facts and details about the bill itself. So we'll start with a very little bit of history. In November 2017, Republicans in the House of Representatives passed a bill they called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That took a while. Once it passed there, it moved over to the Senate, where they fought about it until about 3 a.m. on Saturday, December 2nd, which is when senators passed their version of the bill. But just because it passed the House and the Senate doesn't mean it's now a law. The House passed one version, and the Senate passed an entirely different version of the law. Now it goes to what's called conference. A committee of representatives and senators fight until it's settled. Once that's done, that final version needs to pass in the House and then the Senate. Now, the Republican Party has promised to get this all done before 2017 is over. So that was some basic history, now very basic politics. Democrats hate this bill. Every Democrat senator and representative voted against it. But just because Democrats hate it doesn't necessarily mean that all Republicans like it. A lot of the Republican senators took a lot of convincing, and in the end, one of the Republican senators actually voted against it. So you've got a little bit of history, you've got a little bit of politics, and that's where we're going to start. Now, I'm assuming that you might not have a crystal clear understanding of this tax bill. I hope you don't mind my presuming that. I only say it because I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to figure this thing out, and it is changing by the day, crazy complicated, and I still don't have my head wrapped around it. So my recommendation if you end up talking about the tax bill is that you listen carefully. Like I said, Democrats really don't like this bill, but Republicans are divided on it. So depending on what someone's saying about it can give you a hint to where they're coming from. That said, that's a political party distinction. I actually think it's easier to think about the bill if you instead think about the left versus the right, which is an economic distinction. Remember in episode 1 where we talked about the farmer and the city and who ought to pay for building a bridge? Well, it's really important to keep those differences in mind when you're talking about tax reform. So if you remember part 1, we said that Republicans are generally on the right side of that argument. They think that property should be kept as free as possible. And they defend that by saying if you've earned something, you should be able to keep that thing. And it's super easy to be cynical about that opinion. And Democrats usually attack that by saying it's only the super rich trying to get super richer, or enormous corporations trying to centralize their power. Now, they say that because Democrats usually are on the left side of that argument. They think that property and possessions are what should get taxed, and they prefer a higher income level get taxed at a higher percentage level. Now, that's another position that it's super easy to be cynical about. Republicans view that and say it's penalizing success and rewarding laziness and one step away from socialism. There are 323 million people in this country, and as a whole, we earn nearly $18.5 trillion every year. The conversation about taxes has got to be more complicated than everyone deserves to keep everything they've ever earned, and anyone who needs any help is immediately owed it by anyone who earns more than them. I only say all that because, well, I've been looking at this bill over the last 2 weeks. It's been incredibly rare to find anyone who doesn't talk about the bill through their specific lens of right or left. When you're wearing blue-tinted glasses, yeah, it's going to look like everyone's drowning. Maybe it'll make more sense once we get into what the bill is trying to do. If you're on the right, you may think that the best way to create more money in the economy is to allow the biggest earners in the economy, corporations, keep more of what they make. You're one of the landowners in our old example. But if you're on the left, you want something else. You want the people who are earning the most and the people who are profiting the most from the way the system works to pay the most. You're a worker or a city in our old example. So, all that said, what I'm about to say is going to sound like an attack against the bill. And I don't mean it to be. And that is that I believe there really was only one reason for writing this law. There was only one thing in all of their deliberations that Republican lawmakers wouldn't allow to be removed, and that is lowering the corporate income tax from 35% to 20%. But lowering corporate taxes doesn't sound so good to the average voter. So I think there's a lot of stuff thrown into this bill, in my personal opinion, to help the average voter think that it's just as good for them as it is for the corporations. Now again, I'm not attacking this bill. I'm also not supporting it. I'm just trying to remind folks that this left-right divide in economics and politics is very old. It's been being talked about for a long time, and there's no answer. No one knows who should pay for all this stuff. And anyone who says otherwise is lying to you, selling something, or running for office. Because they know that economics and taxes are very boring, so they appeal to your emotion instead. Which is why if you're watching an interview with a Republican lawmaker, you should just try and count how many times they say the words hard-earned money. Because they love appealing to the emotion in you that you deserve to keep what's yours. They also just don't want to remind you that corporations want to keep what's theirs. Or listen to an interview with a Democratic lawmaker and try to count how many times they bring up corporate interests. Because they love appealing to your sense of outrage that faceless corporations should be able to be treated better than the people. But they also don't want to just come out and say that we should take what belongs to other people. The fact is, this bill drastically reduces the amount that corporations pay on annual income taxes, and only modestly affects individual tax rates. In spite of that, I'm taking the very controversial position that most Republican lawmakers have a sincere belief that it's the most efficient way to improve the economy. I also believe that people opposed to the bill do so because they have a sincere belief that it's not. But what you're going to hear from both sides is antagonistic rhetoric that tries to get you emotionally involved. Because for some reason, people don't get really excited about tax policy and economic theory. At the same time, though, I get it. I spent many hours trying to figure this bill out, what it changes, how to explain those changes, and make it interesting. But I'm not up to it. It's way too hard. Now, like I said, there are links to many resources below the video. But I understand why people don't want to pay attention. But no matter what anyone tells you, it is very hard to predict what this bill is going to do immediately after it passes, weeks or years after it passes, even decades after it passes. Which leads me to another personal observation. It's been reported that an hour before the vote, Republican lawmakers were making substantial handwritten changes to this 480-page document that no one senator had read in its entirety before the vote. Furthermore, apparently some of those handwritten notes may have unintentionally caused a $289 billion change to the tax code. So here's that personal opinion. I don't care which side you fall on. This legislation needed more time, and it needed more discussion from everyone involved. But Republicans felt rushed, and we'll talk about why in a later video. You've probably heard a lot about this tax bill in the last few weeks, and honestly, you're only going to hear a lot more. But if I could, I have one suggestion for you. If you do get into conversations with people about this bill, try and really listen to hear exactly where they're coming from. The words that people choose to use and the sources that they cite can help you get a better sense of what they value, what they're afraid of, and why taxes matter to them. I can't tell you everything and every detail about this bill, but I do hope now you have a little bit of a better understanding about why certain people say certain things about it. All right, that's it for me. I really hope you liked this. If you did, please consider sharing it with someone else. Thanks. See you around. Next time on the Talk Better Project, some of the history of income taxes in the United States and laws about them. Hey, did you know that per the Constitution, taxation on income is illegal? How did that change then? And not through the There is only one thing that corporate, come on, that corporate, oh, balls. Pretty much, stop saying pretty much. Side of that argument. Because, oh yeah, from the system and hard-earned money. Everyone should deserve something else. You want... I hope